Not supposed to. You may remember that last year's big winter storm caused some major power outages in Texas, but that wasn't the problem here. Here, we didn't have water, and that's because the city's pumping stations froze up and miles of pipelines burst, and it took more than a week to get fresh drinking water. This year, we have water, but no power. So cold weather is basically our kryptonite.
Does this, as people observe this, suggest a lack of preparation by the utilities?
Well, because it only snows or freezes a few times a year around here, normally things just shut down for a day or two. But 2 years in a row now, people are starting to wonder if this could be the new normal with climate change. But also, I have to say that there's this user side of public services, especially here in the South. Nobody expects frozen bridges, but because of that, we had a 16-car pileup on one end of town, and on the other, a tractor-trailer jackknifed and shut down one of the Mississippi River bridges for a few hours. So it's a big mess.
So you're camping at the radio station until your power comes back on. Other people are doing whatever they can. How long are the outages expected to last?
Well, our public utility, Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, warned us yesterday afternoon that this was not going to be a quick fix. There are 50 crews working 16-hour shifts. It could take through Sunday to get the power back. And in the meantime, schools and colleges are closed. A number of flights have been canceled. And even FedEx, which is headquartered here, said that some packages could be delayed.
Christopher, thanks for the update and hope you're able to stay warm.
Thank you, Steve.
Christopher Blank is the news director and temporary resident of WKNO in Memphis, Tennessee. This is NPR News.
Just ahead, nursing homes are having trouble keeping nurses on staff.
They aren't being compensated properly. They are being asked to pick up extra shifts, to pick up double shifts, and that's a lot.
Many nurses are leaving these jobs to work through staffing agencies where they can make far more money for the exact same work. We'll have that story at 5:35. You're on Morning Edition on WUSF 89.7. Good morning, I'm Bradley George. Glad you're with us on this Friday morning, February 4th. A budget proposal in the Florida Senate includes a higher minimum wage for school workers in Florida. You can read about that and other happenings in the state legislature at WUSFnews.org. You can also keep up with what's happening on social media. Find us on Twitter at WUSF, and we're on Facebook and Instagram at WUSF Public Media. It's 67 degrees in Tampa, 64 in St. Petersburg, 63 in Lakeland, 64 in Sarasota and Bradenton, 62 in Newport Richey. Spectrum Bay News 9 meteorologist Julie Marquez says today will be sunny, partly cloudy, high temperatures around 80. Cloudy tonight with a 40% chance of rain. Tomorrow, 40% chance of rain. High temperatures only in the mid-60s, but at least it's not freezing temperatures that we saw last weekend, so keep that back. It's 5. On the next Science Friday, have you ever thought about donating time to science? But nearly everybody's brain is suitable for donation. Every time we
This is where it happened. I'm standing in the middle of Kiev in this city center, this Maidan, where there is a memorial to the protests of 2014. And I'm standing here with a woman who was there. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Daria Yurmak. I'm a journalist. So yeah, I took part in the Revolution of Dignity in 2013 and 14. And it was really emotional and important for me personally.
It was called the Revolution of Dignity. Explain why.
Because people couldn't stand the lie and all of this corruption anymore, and as long as we expected moving toward EU and NATO, and power decided to stop this future from us, and yeah, it was basically young people, but also our parents supported us, of course, but it got quite tense when riot police hit students. So it was really unexpected and brutal.
What are your memories of that violence? I mean, many people died.
Actually, I haven't witnessed this police action because this first night, police beat the students. I left to my hometown, and when I came home and read the newsfeed, I was shocked because there were still my friends, and it was really scary because we were unsecure and we didn't have any weapons, any helmets on us. So yeah, it was really scary.
When you told me earlier that it was very emotional being here, can you describe one of those moments?
I remember that when we were standing here, it was really freezing. It was snowing, freezing, and yeah, it was like now, and people take like warm clothes with them and share these clothes with each other. So it was like atmosphere of unity. And when I saw like December 1st, it was the first meeting when like 1 million people came here to Maidan. Yeah,
Here,
yeah.
in this square.
Yeah, it was really exciting, and it felt like we're invincible and we can change our future actually.
Then it wasn't very long when Russia annexed Crimea, Russian-backed separatists took Donetsk, Luhansk, and the fighting continues there. How does what happened here in Maidan, how do you think about it in relation to the ongoing cycle of aggression and violence from Russia?
So Ukraine paid a huge price for its freedom, it's obvious, but I think it was worth it, and we have lots of important changes in our country for the last 8 years, but still and feel of danger, and to be honest, I really exhausted of being stressed.
Have you had conversations with your parents about this?
So like lots of my relatives came through this Soviet repressions, and they knew what Russia is and what is Russian influence. Yes, so of course they worry, my family worry about all of these things, but they still in Lviv. It's like Western Ukraine, so it's feel more safe there. Yeah, but my husband's family, they live in the eastern part, and they all already left from the occupied territory. They lost their homes, so they now live in Lysychansk, and they worry very much, I think, because they already lost their home and they don't want to lose it again.
And that is part of the cycle Ukrainians are trapped in. They're carrying not just the trauma of their parents or grandparents who remember different chapters of Russian aggression. They're absorbing the current pain, the losses those they love are suffering to this day. But standing here in the Maidan, Daria talks about what has changed since the revolution of 2014.
We got our strong army that can protect us, and other things. For example, the state became more open. The state opened all the archive documents of KGB and communists files, so now we can learn our history.
And knowing that history is a step towards making sure it stops repeating itself.
On WUSF. Good morning, I'm Bradley George. Today's jobs report is expected to show the fallout from the Omicron wave of coronavirus infections, which reached its peak last month. Analysts expect stronger job gains to come in the next few months. We'll get a preview from NPR's Scott Horsley coming up at 5:45 here on WUSF 89.7, your NPR station.
Tyler Klein, and on Modern Notebook this week, tune in for a work by Anthony Barfield for euphonium and a panel called Meditations of Sound and Light on Eleanor Alberga's String Quartet No. 3. And this piece here from Mallet Percussion Quartet by Devontae Hines, titled Perfectly Voiceless, which begins with a wall of old-school minimalist textures and eventually gives way to a really catchy pop melody. That's on the next Modern Notebook, Sunday night from 8 to 10 on Classical WSM on 89.1, 103.9.
News in Washington. I'm Dave Mattingly. The State Department is accusing Russia of planning to stage fake attacks in eastern Ukraine as a way to justify an invasion of that country by Russian troops.
This is information that's available to us. We're making it available to you in order for a couple of reasons. One is to attempt to deter the Russians from going ahead with this activity. Two, in the event we're not able to do that, in the event the Russians do go ahead with this, to make it clear as day, to lay bare the fact that this has always been an attempt on the part of the Russian Federation to fabricate a pretext.
As State Department spokesman Ned Price, Moscow continues to deny it's planning to invade Ukraine. More than 100,000 Russian troops and equipment are in areas bordering that country. The president of France says he will travel to Moscow and Kyiv next week to try to de-escalate tensions. North Korea will be the focus today when the UN Security Council meets in emergency session. As Linda Fasula reports, members plan to examine Pyongyang's latest round of missile tests.
Security Council members are to meet behind closed doors today to discuss North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch, which violates UN Security Council resolutions prohibiting such tests. The U.S. has been pressing to strengthen UN sanctions without success, due largely to Russian and Chinese opposition. No action is expected from the Council today.
This is NPR News.
Good morning, I'm Bradley George with WUSF 89.7 News. Florida House Education Subcommittee approved legislation this week that would change how school grades. The measure introduces a new digital statewide K-12 assessment program. It could also raise the thresholds schools have to achieve on the grading scale to earn an A or a B during the academic year. Marie-Claire Lehman of Fund Education Now worries that this will hurt low-performing schools.
We're really worried about those schools that are in turnaround and how they will be forced to choose newer and newer options, especially since our turnaround process has shortened in terms of years and our options have also decreased.
Any grade adjustment would not take place before the 2023-24 school year, and districts would have a transition year where poor performance would not be held against them. The Senate measure is heading to its final committee stop. Yesterday, the Tampa City Council decided to go ahead with a plan to design a system to pipe wastewater that's now dumped into Tampa Bay into the Hillsborough River instead. Council members voted 6-1 to study the plan, which will come up for another vote in the fall. Dozens of people spoke out against the proposal. Environmental activist Phil Compton says it's a continuation of an earlier idea dubbed by critics as toilet to tap. That plan would have injected the wastewater into the underground aquifer. Revamped design would pipe treated effluent to just downstream from the city's main source of drinking water.
We only support today's allocation request because of the possibility, slim as it may be, that it is possible to create safe and affordable water out of this contaminated resource. If it turns out to not work, pull the plug and push for other approaches to drought-proofing our future.
And city officials say they're trying to comply with the state law, which bans the dumping of treated effluent into waterways by 2032. You can read more about this proposal at wusfnews.org. Spectrum Bay News 9 meteorologist Julie Marquez says we're in for a sunny day. Could be a little cloudy later on. And warm, high temperatures around 80. Cloudy tonight with a 30% chance of rain. Lows around 60. I'm Bradley George. This is WUSF 89.7 News.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Cy Sims Foundation since 1985, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts towards a fairer, more just society. More information is available at cysimsfoundation.org. And from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, using research and evidence to develop solutions that help families and communities create a brighter future for young people. More information is available at aecf.org.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rachel Martin in Kyiv.
And I'm Steve Inskeep in Washington. Good morning. The Winter Olympics are beginning in Beijing today. Almost 3,000 athletes will compete in the days ahead. Skiing, skating, curling. But the location of these games makes them about more than sports. Russian President Vladimir Putin is in Beijing for the games and is meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. NPR's Brian Mann is also in Beijing for the opening ceremonies.
Well, we're going to see athletes from all these nations parading in, flag bearers from the U.S. This traditional ceremony will be John Schuster. He is a curler. In fact, it's a sport, of course, where they use brooms to guide those stones over the ice. His team won a surprise gold medal 4 years ago. The other flag bearer is going to be speed skater Brittany Bowe. She's actually subbing for veteran bobsled racer Alana Myers-Taylor, who was chosen to carry the flag for the U.S. but had to isolate after testing positive for COVID. So right out of the gate, Steve, we're sort of feeling the pandemic here. And then after the athletes, we're going to have a big show, although, again, because of the pandemic, the spectacle here is expected to be scaled back.
Pandemic security, of course, is incredibly strict at these games. I get the impression the athletes will have hardly any contact with ordinary people in Beijing. Is there going to be an audience at this ceremony?
Very small crowd, mostly journalists and VIPs, but here's a big story developing here. One notable guest is Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is expected to attend this ceremony. He's made a high-profile visit this week with China's President Xi Jinping. They've been talking about economic ties between these countries, including a new energy deal. It's a big contrast to the official position of the U.S. government. Of course, the Biden administration decided back in December to stage a diplomatic boycott of these Winter Games because of what the White House calls ongoing genocide, crimes of humanity against the Uyghur people here in China. So while the pandemic is shaping a lot of the Olympic experience here, politics and questions about human rights also front and center.
Which the people who run the Olympics say is not what they would like. They would like this to be a show of nations' peace. They're really not about politics at all, just about sport. But Thomas Bach, the International Olympic Committee president, has had to be asked about the persecution of Uyghurs in China. He's been asked about the decision to hold the games in China at all in this authoritarian country. How does he respond?
Yeah, as you say, he's trying to make this all about sports, saying politics don't mix here. Here's what he had to say.
If we are taking a political standpoint, then we have to make the games everything.
But of course, Steve, with Putin in the stands tonight with President Xi, the optics are just unavoidable. These two authoritarian leaders will be front and center as these Winter Games get started.
What do you hear from the athletes about all this?
Well, again and again, athletes from the U.S. say they're trying to pivot from all that, from the pandemic, from the politics, and just trying to enjoy this moment. Here's Maggie Boyson. She's a freestyle skier from Whitefish, Montana.
I'm really pleasantly surprised with just how much we've been able to do and how much we've been able to interact with other countries. It's really just been such a wonderful experience, and we're fired up to get this show going.
So for a lot of these athletes, Steve, the next couple of weeks, they're going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. This is competition they've been training for in many cases their whole lives.
Ryan, good to hear from you. Enjoy the games.
All right, thanks, Steve.
NPR's Brian Mann is at the Winter Olympics in Beijing. They are being broadcast live in the U.S. on NBC this morning with a repeat broadcast coming up this evening.
Justin Hicks explains.
Roughly a quarter of all nursing homes say they have a shortage of nurses. Zena Lowry, a licensed practical nurse in Indiana, says that's because even before COVID, it was a nearly impossible job.
They aren't being compensated properly. They are being asked to pick up extra shifts, to pick up double shifts. And that's a lot. Everyone needs to treat their nurses better.
Add COVID challenges to that, and it's easy to see why nurses are leaving nursing homes in droves. Many like Lowry who are sticking around are going to staffing agencies. They offer flexible short-term contracts and lately pay a lot more for the exact same work. Lowry says right now she can make roughly $20 an hour more than when she was a nursing home staff member. In areas with really critical shortages, nurses can make even more.
We're gaining that power back. We're understanding our worth and knowing our power, and we're negotiating that.
But some nursing home officials are crying foul. They say the rising rates they're having to pay staffing agencies amounts to price gouging. Here's Bernie McGinnis, CEO of Majestic Care, a company with long-term care facilities across the Midwest.
To be blunt, I feel taken advantage of. Not even close to a fair market value am I being asked to pay, and that price it's unsustainable.
McGinnis says he wants to pay his nurses better and compete with staffing agencies, but he relies on reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid, which haven't kept up. So he's at a disadvantage.
We've seen our costs go up, 10, 11% each year during this pandemic in a labor standpoint, in some markets even more. Reimbursement does not go up 10 and 11% a year.
So McGinnis wants lawmakers to step in and do something to control the rising costs. Chris Madden heads the staffing agency Networks Connect. He acknowledges nursing homes are upset, but says it's more about supply and demand.
The villain is COVID. the villain is COVID here, and it's just the silent villain that you can't talk to, you can't reason with, and we are just nobody knows what to do.
Madden says staffing agencies have to compete against each other for fewer nurses, demanding bigger paychecks.
Can you blame them? Can you blame them? They're just saying, this is what the market's paying, and I want to get paid that too. They're not holding their care. They're just saying, I want to be compensated for it.
John Boglis researches economics and geriatric care at Miami University in Ohio. He says federal CARES Act money going to nursing homes has helped some weather recent spikes in labor costs, but that's not sustainable.
If this continues on this way, you will see a large number of nursing homes that might have to declare bankruptcy. Or the other option is politically that you have to increase reimbursement, and a lot of states don't want to do that.
Instead, what some states are doing is considering putting wage caps on how much staffing agencies can pay workers. So far, Minnesota and Massachusetts are doing exactly that. And economists worry that capping salaries can backfire and drive away even more nurses. For NPR News, I'm
Coming up on All Things Considered, hardly anyone writes checks anymore, right? So why has there been a surge in check forging? To listen, ask your smart speaker to play NPR or your member station by name. This is NPR News.
Coming up, a new essay collection from Black scholars and experts asks questions and poses solutions to complicated issues that range from climate policy to criminal justice reform. We'll hear from one of the authors of that collection. It's called The Black Agenda. It's coming up at 5:51 on WUSF 89.7.
Hi, I'm Melissa Ross. And I'm Tom Hudson. Join us every Friday at noon for the Florida Roundup.
It's your chance to talk with and hear from people all over the state. Politics, education, the environment, and more. If it's news in Florida, we want to hear from you.
Join us Friday for the Florida Roundup, a live call-in program where you talk about the biggest stories in the state.
Every Friday at noon on WUSF 89.7.
And on the next Florida Roundup, neo-Nazi demonstrations in Orlando highlight the state's reputation as a hotbed for extremist groups. We'll discuss the fallout. You can call or tweet to join the conversation on the next Florida Roundup. coming up today at noon. It is Friday, February 4th, and looking back at the state of history, it's the birthday of Miami-Dade County. It was just Dade County back then, created by territorial lawmakers in 1836. The cornerstone was laid for downtown Tampa's Sacred Heart Catholic Church on the state in 1900. Construction began on one of downtown Tampa's premier hotels in its day, the 18-story Floridian Hotel, on the estate in 1926, and for years it was the tallest building in Florida. And the Floridian's big band nightclub, the Sapphire Room, was a popular hangout for Air Force lonely hearts during World War II, and named it the Surefire Room. Today's going to be sunny and partly cloudy as well. It will be warm to high temperatures in the lower 80s. Tonight, mostly cloudy, with lows around 60.
I'm Peter O'Dowd. Are you in need of a little healing, a bit of joy? You might find it in some new classical music from composer Kevin Day.
This piece is really my reflection about where we've been the last couple of years, and I really hope that it can inspire comfort, it can give people a sense of hope.
Next time on Here and Now.
That's coming up today from 1 until 3 on WUSF 89.7.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Cy Sims Foundation, since 1985, supporting advances in science, education, and the arts towards a fairer, more just society. More information is available at cysimsfoundation.org. And from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, using research and evidence to develop solutions that help families and communities create a brighter future for young people. More information is available at aecf.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Rachel Martin. Good morning. Here's one thing we know about what happened in January. Millions of people were infected with the Omicron variant. Here's a thing we don't know, but are about to find out. How sick that made the job market last month. The Labor Department is expected to report this morning on how many jobs were gained or lost in the month of January, and we've got NPR's Scott Horsley with us to sort of preview what's likely to happen. Hey, Scott.
Good morning.
We know the Delta variant put some hurt on the U.S. economy last year. How much of a dent do analysts expect to see from Omicron when it comes to the economy?
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but we do know that the Labor Department conducted its January jobs tally just about 3 weeks ago, right around the time that the coronavirus infections from Omicron were hitting their peak at more than 800,000 a day. Lise Gould, who's with the Economic Policy Institute, says that likely depressed employers' demand for workers, especially at in-person businesses like restaurants, and it also may have sidelined some people who otherwise would have been working.
I would certainly be surprised if we don't see the fingerprints of the pandemic, its recent Omicron surge.
Forecasters think employers probably added fewer jobs in January than the 199,000 that were added back in December. And it's possible the economy even lost jobs last month. If so, that would be the first monthly loss of jobs since the end of 2020, when we had another big spike in infections. Of course, that was before vaccines were widely available.
Right. So if we do really see weak job growth in today's data, or even a loss of jobs, explain what that means.
It's not what you like to see. I mean, we're still almost 3.6 million jobs short of where we were before the pandemic, so we'd like to see, pretty rapid job growth to help make that up. But we do know the Omicron wave has begun to fade already. This spike was very sharp, but also fairly brief, and so the damage to the job market could be short-lived as well. Gould notes that daily infections have already fallen by more than half from where they were in the middle of last month.
We see them coming down by the end of January. The question is then, how quickly will they come down? And that's really a public health expert question. But you could see a recovery as early as February and certainly March if we can start putting the pandemic behind us.
We also know that employers still have a lot of jobs they would like to fill. There were almost 11 million job openings at the end of December. Some of those may have been put on hold during the Omicron wave, but they could unfreeze fairly quickly, and we could see stronger hiring in the months to come.
Well, talk more about that, because this has been a persistent issue, right? Employers looking around for the people they need to fill those jobs.
Yeah, and that's been a challenge for employers. Millions of people left the workforce during the pandemic, and some of those people have been slow to return. Gould thinks we could see more people coming off the sidelines and re-entering the job market, once the public health outlook improves.
As it becomes safer and as fewer people are sick, they can participate more fully in the labor market, and we will see that return. And unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that will be, as workers are less scarce, they may not have the same kind of leverage they had in the fall to be able to bid up their wages.
Over the last year, employers have had to compete to get the workers they need, and in many cases, they've had to raise wages, offer better benefits, or both. Wages and salaries in December were up about 4.5% from the previous year, which is good. Unfortunately, it's not quite good enough to keep pace with inflation, which, as we know, is the highest it's been in nearly 40 years. On average, workers have lost purchasing power in the last year, and that's why the Federal Reserve is under such mounting pressure to get inflation under control.
NPR's Scott Mercer, thank you.
You're welcome.
You hear him on NPR News.
Florida law says most people under the age of 18 need parental consent to talk to a doctor about abortion, but there are alternatives. WUSF's Kathy Carter explains at 6:04. Also, NPR travels to northern Ukraine to hear from people who live near the border with Belarus.
It's very good to live here. It's very beautiful nature, and not far from here, it's a beautiful river.
There are also a significant number of Russian troops on the Belarusian side of the border. We'll hear more from Rachel Martin in Ukraine coming up in the next hour of Morning Edition. Good morning, I'm Bradley George. Glad you're with us on this Friday morning, February 4th, the first day of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. You'll be hearing about that throughout the morning here on WUSF. Also, you can support all the news and programs you hear on this station in a number of ways, including donating that old car you don't need anymore. Could we be worth hundreds of dollars to WUSF, no matter what condition it's in? Go to WUSF.org/vehicle to learn more. Call 866-987-3227. That's WUSF.org/vehicle or 866-987-3227. Thank you so much for supporting your NPR station, WUSF 89.7. It's 5:51.
4.3 million people in this economy quit their jobs in December. You, business owner over there, what do you do with that?
So if historically you had about a 10% turnover rate, you should really be planning to have about a 15% turnover rate, all else equal, once we get fully through the pandemic.
I'm Kyle Rizdal, Ceteris Paribus. That's the challenge. It's time on Marketplace.
That's coming up tonight at 6 on WUSF.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Rachel Martin.
I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Layla Falvey.
In the Black Agenda, bold solutions to a broken system, writer, researcher, and activist Anna Gifty Opoku Ajima pulls together a collection of essays from Black scholars and experts. These thought leaders ask solutions to complicated issues that range from climate policy to criminal justice reform. The through line, race, and the systemic racism that has informed U.S. policy for more than 400 years. Anna Gifty Opoku Ajima joins us now. Thank you for being here, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know, we need to talk about this book, which really tries to do so much through these essays. Why this book? Why now?
So the Black Agenda, in my opinion, is giving a really compelling case for the humanity of Black people. And I think a lot of times when Black folks, especially Black experts, are trying to make that case in the mainstream or in public discourse, they're often dismissed or silenced. And a lot of times people say, well, you know, you're Black, how can you be objective about circumstances that are affecting your community or your life? And so this book says, you know, look, Black experts have been generating evidence for years. And so we need to put that out in the open for the mainstream. And it ultimately was inspired by the fact that, you know, during the very beginning of the pandemic, I was, you know, paying attention to the news, looking to see stories about racial inequity being represented in how we're thinking about data collection and how we're thinking about analyses. And I couldn't find it. And so I went to my literary agent and I said, look, I have an idea. It's kind of crazy. But what if we brought all these Black experts together in one book, pushed the book out, and got these folks into the mainstream so that they can now be cited and amplified as they deserve to be?
Is there one particular essay that sticks with you from this collection?
Yes, there is actually. Every time I read it, I start to cry. And the way it goes is it's by Dr. Lauren Mims. It's talking about sort of the brilliance of black girls in the classroom. She says, look, I was teaching a classroom of black girls, and she says, you know, why do you think you're here? And the answers that they provide are heartbreaking. Someone says, because I'm a bad student. Someone says, because I'm a troublemaker. Someone says, because I'm a teenage mom. And so she talks about how she takes in all of those responses. It makes her emotional. She's trying not to cry. And then after they're done, she goes through each of those responses that she's written on the board, and she starts to cross them out and replace them with positive affirmations. And I think for me, as a young black woman who's also been told, like, I'm too enthusiastic, right? Like, I'm too loud, I should use my inside voice. It was very affirming. I've been that girl in that classroom, and so that's why it's one of my favorite essays in the book.
You know, I got to the section on criminal justice, and you start with a stark list of names.
Yes.
Just some of the more than 200 black people that have been killed since George Floyd, since Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. In the book, Tahir Duckett, civil rights attorney and advocate and executive director of Georgetown Center for Innovations and Community Studies, she writes that, quote, the truth is that no system of policing and prisons at its heart can regularly deliver justice to black people, as these institutions are designed to criminalize our existence. So let's talk about that, because a lot of people get scared when they hear slogans like defund the police or terms like abolish when it comes to the criminal justice system.
Absolutely, I think that's a really great point. You know, Tahir made several points around that. But something that was pointed out to me recently is that criminal justice actually comes up in every single section of this book, if you look closely. So what Tahir's talking about in his essay actually comes up in climate, it comes up in healthcare, it comes up in how we think about, you know, the rural South, specifically with black folks. All these black experts are saying the same thing. It should not be illegal to be black in America. Black life should not be criminalized. And in the criminal justice chapter, it is the only chapter where literally the problem is statistics. It's the facts. So for example, out of 17,500 police killings between 2005 and 2021, only 140 police officers were indicted on murder or manslaughter charges. So, you know, when Benga Adjulore says we cannot solve problems in the Black Belt where, you know, the majority of black folks are living in the South by putting more people in jail, we have to invest in community resources.
So we've got to talk about this moment that this book is coming out. I mean, it's coming out as we're living through a reignited movement for Black lives, a racial reckoning, but also a backlash against that movement, hysteria over critical race theory. What is it like to try to center black voices when a swath of this country refuses to acknowledge institutional racism?
It's hard, period, to do that. But I think it's always been hard. You know, the fact that folks are being upset around folks teaching, you know, all of the nooks and crannies of the harms and atrocities done to black folks is a direct result of folks feeling guilty, right? Like, you feel guilty that you have benefited from something that has caused so much harm, and you're trying to absolve yourself from it. And I think what this book does in such an eloquent way is it presents us with the facts. These experts have been studying the literature, have been having their lived experience of racial inequality for so long that they understand how this is going to play out. And so for me, this book came at the perfect time. It just makes a case, a compelling case for why Black life matters.
At the end of this book, you have a series of recommended readings. And you spoke about how you didn't see black experts on mainstream platforms. Is this a reference book? Is this book the start of a journey for a reader?
What this book ultimately does is it removes the excuse of we don't know where to look. You say you don't know where to look, I say go check out the book. There's 35 names right there. And then look at the sources. And so when you ask me what kind of book this is, it's a call to action to stand with black people, to advocate for black life in all sectors of policy. This book ultimately is a work of conviction because the facts are very, very clear. Black life has been criminalized, undermined, underappreciated, undervalued, quite literally, for its entire existence in America's history. And what this book does is it doesn't give you a reason to look away.
Anna Gifty Apoku Ajima, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Layla Falk.
I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Rachel Martin.
Coming up on the next Florida Matters, it's the midway point for the Florida legislative session in Tallahassee, a good time to take a closer look at what laws could soon be passed. Restrictions on abortions, voting rights, teaching critical race theory, and other hot-button items are making their way through committees right now. We'll talk with journalists who cover these issues closely and discuss how many bills will become laws. That's on Florida Matters, Tuesday evening at 6:30 on WUSF 89.7.
This is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, broadcasting from our studios, USF Tampa and USF Sarasota Manatee. Morning, I'm Bradley George. It is Friday, February 4th. It's 67 degrees in Tampa, 63 in St. Petersburg, 64 in Sarasota and Bradenton, 60 in Spring Hill. It's going to be another warm day, mostly sunny to partly cloudy, highs around 80. Cloudy tonight with a 30% chance of rain. Low temperatures around 60. It's 6 o'clock.
Good morning. We take you to the Ukrainian border this morning. Russian troops are there, but it's quiet for now. Ukrainians say they've had practice being invaded by Russia before. We're on the road in Ukraine on Morning Edition from NPR News. A Ukrainian border guard recalls how the last Russian incursion disrupted his education. I'm Rachel Martin in Kyiv.
And I'm Steve Inskeep in Washington. Amazon defeated a union vote in Alabama, but employees plan to try again. Also, how long will power stay out in parts of Tennessee? And in Story Court, 2 people recall living in a van. It's Friday, February 4th. This day in 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt met Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. With Winston Churchill, they discussed the world order and who would dominate Europe. The news is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Russian President Putin has met Chinese President Xi in Beijing ahead of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games. Putin is praising Russia's close ties with China as tensions mount between Russia and Western nations over Ukraine. The Olympic opening ceremonies start in 1 hour. NPR's Brian Mann reports from Beijing crowds are limited because of pandemic restrictions.
This opening ceremony will begin with the parade of athletes from many of the countries competing in these Beijing Winter Games. The spectacle that follows is expected to be smaller, more scaled down than we've seen at Olympic Games in the past. That's because of the pandemic, which has forced China to hold these games inside a bubble. Very few people are expected to be in attendance here, a stripped-down crowd because of the COVID controls.
All of the nooks and crannies of the harms and atrocities done to black folks is a direct result of folks feeling guilty, right? Like, you feel guilty that you have benefited from something that has caused so much harm, and you're trying to absolve yourself from it. And I think what this book does in such an eloquent way is it presents us with the facts. These experts have been studying the literature, have been having their lived experience of racial inequality for so long that they understand how this is going to play out. And so for me, this book came at the perfect time. It just makes a case, a compelling case for why Black life matters.
At the end of this book, you have a series of recommended readings. And you spoke about how you didn't see Black experts on mainstream platforms. Is this a reference book? Is this book the start of a journey for a reader?
What this book ultimately does is it removes the excuse of we don't know where to look. You say you don't know where to look, I say go look, check out the book. There's 35 names right there. And then look at the sources. And so when you ask me what kind of book this is, it's a call to action to stand with Black people, to advocate for Black life in all sectors of policy. This book ultimately is a work of conviction because the facts are very, very clear. Black life has been criminalized, undermined, underappreciated, undervalued, quite literally, for its entire existence in America's history. And what this book does is it doesn't give you a reason to look away.
Anagifti Apoku Ajima. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Leila Fadel.
I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Rachel Martin.
Coming up on the next Florida Matters, it's the midway point for the Florida legislative session in Tallahassee, a good time to take a closer look at what laws could soon be passed. Restrictions on abortions, voting rights, teaching critical race theory, and other hot-button items are making their way through committees right now. We'll talk with journalists who cover these issues closely and discuss how many bills will become laws. That's on Florida Matters, Tuesday evening at 6:30 on WUSF 89.7.
This is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, broadcasting from our studios, USF Tampa and USF Sarasota Manatee. Morning, I'm Bradley George. It is Friday, February 4th. It's 67 degrees in Tampa, 63 in St. Petersburg, 64 in Sarasota and Bradenton, 60 in Spring Hill. It's going to be another warm day, mostly sunny to partly cloudy, highs around 80. Cloudy tonight with a 30% chance of rain. Low temperatures around 60. It's 6 o'clock.
Good morning. We take you to the Ukrainian border this morning. Russian troops are there, but it's quiet for now. Ukrainians say they've had practice being invaded by Russia before. We're on the road in Ukraine on Morning Edition from NPR News. A Ukrainian border guard recalls how the last Russian incursion disrupted his education. I'm Rachel Martin in Kyiv.
And I'm Steve Inskeep in Washington. Amazon defeated a union vote in Alabama, but employees plan to try again. Also, how long will power stay out in parts of Tennessee? And in Story Court, 2 people recalled living in a van. It's Friday, February 4th. This day in 1945, President Franklin Roosevelt met Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. With Winston Churchill, they discussed the world order and who would dominate Europe. The news is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Russian President Putin has met Chinese President Xi in Beijing ahead of the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games. Putin is praising Russia's close ties with China as tensions mount between Russia and Western nations over Ukraine. The Olympic opening ceremonies start in 1 hour. NPR's Brian Mann reports from Beijing crowds are limited because of pandemic restrictions.
This opening ceremony will begin with the parade of athletes from many of the countries competing in these Beijing Winter Games. The spectacle that follows is expected to be smaller, more scaled down than we've seen at Olympic Games in the past. That's because of the pandemic, which has forced China to hold these games inside a bubble. Very few people are expected to be in attendance here, a stripped-down crowd because of the COVID control